Hey everyone, I hope you enjoy this. If you do, feel free to let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Wishing you a great time watching. Hey everyone, I never thought I'd be posting here, but life has a way of hitting you with surprises you'd never see coming. My name's Ryan, and I've been married to Lisa for 8 years. We're that couple you'd see at barbecues, laughing over beers, looking like we have it all together. At least, that's what I thought. Lisa works in marketing for a big corporate firm. It's the kind of job that comes with sleek suits, shiny offices, and, apparently, a lot of parties. I always figured these events were harmless. You know, team-building exercises with some light networking and maybe a few drinks. Turns out, I was laughably wrong. The first sign came about 6 months ago. Lisa started attending these corporate parties more frequently. She'd dress up in outfits that were, let's just say, a little more daring than I was used to seeing. It wasn't just the clothes, it was her whole vibe. She'd come home late, smelling of whiskey and expensive perfume. Her cheeks flushed like she'd just stepped out of some rom-com montage. When I'd ask her how the night went, she'd give me vague answers. Oh, just boring work stuff, she'd say, with that half-laugh people use when they want you to drop the subject. But then there were the inconsistencies. One night, she said the party was at a hotel downtown. A week later, she casually mentioned that the same party had been at a colleague's house. I started getting this weird feeling in my gut, the kind of feeling you can't shake no matter how hard you try. It wasn't just about the late nights or the flimsy excuses. It was the way she'd started treating me. Lisa, my wife, who used to share everything with me, had become cold, distant, like I was an inconvenience, or worse, a stranger. The turning point came 2 weeks ago. Lisa had another one of her work events. I didn't think much of it at first. By then, it had almost become routine. But this time, something felt off. She left the house unusually early, practically sprinting out the door in heels that made her look like she was auditioning for a runway show. Her phone buzzed on the counter as she left, and out of pure habit, I glanced at the screen. It was a text from her coworker, Brandon. "Can't wait to see you tonight." Winky face. That stupid winky face haunted me for hours. I sat on the couch, staring at the TV without really watching. My brain was a storm of paranoia and denial. Brandon was a name she'd mentioned in passing before, always in the context of, oh, he's just annoying, or Brandon's the office clown. I had never thought much of him, until now. When Lisa came home that night, I couldn't bring myself to ask her about the text. Instead, I watched as she staggered through the front door, her lipstick smudged, her hair messy. She reeked of alcohol, laughing to herself like she'd just heard the funniest joke in the world. "Great party?" I asked, keeping my tone light. "Uh-huh," she said, kicking off her heels and stumbling toward the bedroom without so much as a glance in my direction. I sat there for hours, replaying the night over and over in my head. The text, the smirk on her face when she left, the way she'd brush me off like I didn't exist. Something wasn't right. And deep down, I knew this wasn't just about Brandon. I just didn't realize how deep the rabbit hole would go. The morning after that party, Lisa was back to her usual self, or at least she tried to be. She waltzed into the kitchen in sweatpants and one of my old college hoodies, grinning like she hadn't spent the night ignoring me. "Coffee," she chirped like nothing was wrong. I handed her a mug without saying much, still chewing on the events from the night before. She sipped her coffee and scrolled through her phone, completely unbothered by the growing storm in my head. I decided to test the waters. "So, how was the party?" I asked as casually as I could manage. Lisa froze for a split second, just enough for me to notice. Then she shrugged. Same old, same old. Brandon got wasted, made a fool of himself, and everyone laughed. You know how these things are. Brandon again. That name was starting to feel like a splinter I couldn't dig out. I leaned against the counter, watching her carefully. "Where was it this time?" "Oh, She paused, glancing at her phone as if looking for an answer. "Some hotel downtown, I think." I wasn't really paying attention. Her words felt rehearsed, like a line she'd practiced in front of a mirror. I nodded, pretending to accept it, but inside I was fuming. The text, the winky face, her shady behavior, it was all too much. I decided it was time to stop second-guessing myself and start looking for answers. That afternoon, while Lisa was out running errands, I started digging. I wasn't proud of myself, but at this point, I didn't care. I went through her purse first. Nothing out of the ordinary, just a wallet, some receipts, and a ridiculous number of lipsticks. But then I found a key card for a hotel downtown. A quick Google search told me it was for a swanky place I'd never heard of. Definitely not the kind of spot you'd go for a boring corporate mixer. My heart was pounding as I checked her phone next. She had deleted her text thread with Brandon, but she'd forgotten about her email. Buried under work memos and promotional junk was a message with the subject line, "Tonight's plans." It was from Brandon. "Can't wait for tonight. The room is booked under my name. Don't forget that dress I love." Winky face. The winky face again. My chest felt like it was about to cave in. I stared at the screen, reading the message over and over, hoping I'd misunderstood. But the evidence was right there. Lisa wasn't just acting weird. She was full-on lying to my face. When she came home that evening, I tried to act normal. I couldn't let her know what I'd found. Not yet. If she was going to lie, I needed her to keep digging her own grave. "How were errands?" I asked as she kicked off her shoes. "Exhausting," she said with a sigh. "I spent half the day looking for a new lamp for the office. You wouldn't believe how expensive lamps are these days." The lamp light hit differently after seeing that email. I nodded, forcing a smile, while my mind raced with 1,000 questions. How long had this been going on? Did she really think I was stupid enough to believe her weak excuses? The breaking point came 2 days later. Lisa had another work party, another late night with Brandon, no doubt. This time I couldn't sit at home and stew. I needed to know the truth. I followed her. I felt like a creep sitting in my car across from the hotel, watching as Lisa strutted inside in a red dress I'd only ever seen her wear once. On our anniversary. My stomach twisted as I thought about Brandon's email. He'd specifically mentioned that dress. I waited for an hour, maybe more, debating whether I should go inside or just leave. Finally, I made my decision. I grabbed my phone, marched into the lobby, and asked the front desk clerk a simple question. "Hi, I'm supposed to meet someone here, but I forgot the room number. Could you tell me where Brandon Smith is staying?" The clerk hesitated, probably wondering if I was some kind of stalker. But after a quick glance at my wedding ring, she must have decided I looked trustworthy enough. "Room 231, she said with a polite smile. Room 231. The numbers echoed in my head as I made my way to the elevator. My hands were shaking, my heart racing, but I kept going. I couldn't stop now. I had to see it for myself. When I reached the door, I heard muffled voices inside. Lisa's laugh, Brandon's deeper tone. My whole world crumbled as I stood there, staring at the door, debating whether to knock or walk away. But then, before I could decide, the door swung open. Lisa and Brandon froze, their smiles vanishing the second they saw me. Lisa's eyes widened, her face turning pale, while Brandon just stood there, looking like a deer caught in headlights. "Well," I said, my voice cold and steady, "this explains a lot." The three of us stood there, frozen in the hallway. Lisa's jaw moved like she was trying to speak, but no sound came out. Brandon, the so-called office clown, looked ready to bolt. "Ryan," Lisa finally stammered, stepping forward, her voice dripping with fake innocence. "This isn't what it looks like." I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe like I had all the time in the world. "Oh, so you weren't sneaking off to a hotel room with Brandon?" Her face reddened, and she glanced back at Brandon, who had conveniently developed an intense interest in the carpet. "We were just going over some projects for work. That's all." "In a hotel room?" I raised an eyebrow. "Wearing that dress?" Lisa's mouth opened and closed, but no explanation came. Brandon, clearly sensing that Lisa was sinking, cleared his throat. "Ryan, man, this is a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" I barked out a laugh. "Oh, I misunderstood that email you sent. You know, the one about this dress and this room? Care to explain that misunderstanding, Brandon?" His face turned beet red. Lisa grabbed his arm, as if silently pleading for backup, but he just stammered, I think I should go." And just like that, the clown abandoned the act and bolted, leaving Lisa and me alone in the hallway. I turned to her, waiting for whatever excuse she'd try next. Her eyes brimmed with tears, but all I could feel was rage. "I can explain," she whispered, barely audible. "I hope so. I said, my voice icy. Because right now, I'm about 5 seconds away from calling a lawyer. Lisa stood there in the doorway, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to say something but couldn't find the words. Brandon, the supposed office clown, had the nerve to try for a smirk. His arrogance was infuriating, but it gave me the push I needed to step into the room. "Oh, don't mind me," I said, my voice sharper than I'd intended. "Just the husband here to crash the party." Lisa finally snapped out of her daze. "Ryan, this isn't what it looks like," she blurted, her hands shaking as she tried to grab my arm. I stepped back, glaring at her. "Really, Lisa? Because it looks like you're in a hotel room with Brandon. And judging by the dress and the deleted messages, I'd say this is exactly what it looks like." Brandon, who had been silent so far, finally spoke up. "Hey man, calm down. You're making a scene." "A scene?" That broke something in me. I turned to him, my fist clenching. "A scene? You've been sleeping with my wife? And you think I'm overreacting? You've got some nerve, Brandon." Lisa stepped between us, her hands up like a referee at a boxing match. "Please let me explain," she said, tears streaming down her face. "It's not what you think." "Oh, it's exactly what I think," I snapped, looking directly at her. "You've been lying to me for months, sneaking around with him. Do you have any idea what you've done? To me? To us?" The silence that followed was deafening. Lisa's tears were flowing freely now, but they did nothing to move me. Brandon, for his part, seemed like he wanted to bolt out of the room, but he didn't dare move. "Coward." Finally, Lisa whispered, "It didn't mean anything, Ryan. I swear. It was just, I don't know, a mistake." I laughed bitterly. "A mistake? Oh, come on, Lisa. A mistake is forgetting to set the alarm or spilling coffee. This is a calculated betrayal. How long has this been going on?" Her silence was all the answer I needed. She wouldn't even look at me. "You know what?" I said, my voice shaking with anger. "I don't care anymore. You've made your choice, Lisa. Both of you have." I turned to leave, but Lisa grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Ryan, please. We can fix this. Don't throw everything away." I yanked my arm free. "Don't throw everything away? You did that the second you walked into this room with him. I'm done." I walked out of that hotel room, the door slamming behind me like a gavel pronouncing the end of a trial. My heart was pounding, my thoughts racing as I made my way to the elevator. I didn't know where I was going, home, a bar, anywhere but there. By the time I got back to my car, the adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by a hollow, sinking feeling. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the steering wheel, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The truth was there was no making sense of it. Lisa had made her choice, and now I had to figure out what came next. But something told me the worst was far from over, that I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd see Lisa and Brandon in that hotel room. Her tear-streaked face, his smug attempt to brush it off. It all played on a loop, torturing me. By morning, my anger had settled into something colder, something more calculated. If Lisa wanted to explain, fine. But I wasn't going to let her gaslight me or spin this into some story where she was the victim. Around noon, Lisa came home. I heard her keys jingling in the lock, the sound jarring after the silence of the house. I stayed seated at the kitchen table, staring at the cold coffee in front of me. When she walked in, she froze, her face a mix of guilt and fear. "Ryan," she began softly, setting her bag on the counter. "Can we talk?" I looked up at her, my face unreadable. "Talk? Sure. Why don't we talk about your mistake with Brandon?" Lisa flinched, as if I'd physically hit her. She pulled out a chair across from me, but I didn't invite her to sit. She sat anyway, her hands nervously fiddling with the bracelet I'd given her on our 5th anniversary. "First of all, I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I messed up, but it wasn't like how you think." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "Oh, enlighten me. How exactly was it?" Her eyes darted away, and she took a deep breath. "It didn't start as anything serious. It was just flirting at first. Harmless, you know. He'd compliment me at work, make me feel good about myself. And then, harmless." I interrupted, my voice rising. Lisa, you were in a hotel room with him. Do you think I'm stupid? No, she exclaimed, tears pooling in her eyes. I don't think you're stupid, Ryan. I just felt alone. Alone? I echoed, incredulous. So what? You find comfort with Brandon? You couldn't talk to me, your husband? The guy who's been here through everything? Her tears spilled over, and she buried her face in her hands. You've been so distant, Ryan. Always working, always tired. I didn't know how to reach you anymore. Her words hit me like a slap. Part of me wanted to believe her, wanted to think that maybe I'd failed her somehow. But then I remembered Brandon's smirk, the email, the deleted messages. No, this wasn't on me. That's a pathetic excuse, I said coldly. If you were lonely, you could have said something. Instead, you sneak around with him? And don't give me the "it wasn't serious" line. You lied to me, Lisa, over and over again. She wiped her tears, her voice shaky, but firmer now. I didn't want to hurt you, Ryan. I know it sounds crazy, but I didn't think it would get this far. I thought I could stop. But you didn't, I said, my voice like ice. You kept going. You let it get this far. And you weren't just lying to me. You were lying to yourself. We sat in silence, the weight of her betrayal suffocating. I wanted to yell, to throw something, to storm out of the house, and never come back. But instead, I stayed seated, my anger simmering beneath the surface. Ryan, she whispered after a long pause. Can we work through this? Please. I'll do anything. Her words hung in the air, heavy with desperation. I didn't respond. Instead, I stood up and walked to the sink, dumping my cold coffee down the drain. I don't know, Lisa, I said finally, my back to her. I don't know if there's anything left to work through. As I turned to leave the room, she grabbed my hand, her grip tight. Please, she begged, her voice cracking. Give me a chance to fix this. I pulled my hand away, looking her straight in the eyes. You don't fix something like this overnight, and I'm not even sure it's fixable. I walked out, leaving her sitting there at the table, crying into her hands. I didn't feel any satisfaction, no sense of vindication, just an overwhelming emptiness. That night, I slept in the guest room for the first time in our marriage. The bed was too quiet, too cold, but at least I didn't have to share it with someone who had betrayed me. The worst part? I wasn't even sure if the lies were over. Something about the way she spoke, the way she hesitated, it felt like there was more she wasn't telling me, and I was determined to find out. The next morning, I woke up with a headache that had nothing to do with sleep. My mind felt like a storm, every thought crashing into the next. Lisa was already up when I walked into the kitchen, her eyes red and puffy from crying. She looked like she wanted to say something, but I ignored her, pouring myself a cup of coffee like it was just another day. Ryan, she said softly, breaking the silence. I know you don't want to talk, but I can't let it end like this. Please, can we try to fix this? I sat down at the table, the chair scraping against the tile louder than it should have. Fix it? Il est petit, staring here. Lisa, you've been lying to me for months. I don't even know what's true anymore. So if you want to talk, fine. Start by telling me everything. She hesitated, her hands trembling as she wrapped them around her coffee mug. What do you mean by everything? I leaned forward, my voice low but firm. I mean everything. When it started, how long it's been going on, and don't even think about sugarcoating it, because I'll know. Lisa's face crumpled, but I didn't feel any pity. She had made her bed, or rather Brandon's bed, and now she had to lie in it. It started at the first party, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. About 6 months ago, Brandon and I were both pretty drunk, and things got out of hand. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. Define out of hand. Her eyes filled with tears again, but she didn't look away. We kissed, just once that night. But then afterward, he kept flirting with me at work, and I didn't stop him. My stomach twisted, but I kept pushing. In the hotel room? Was that the first time it went further than flirting? She shook her head slowly, her tears spilling over. No, she admitted. It wasn't. There were a few times before that. In his car. At his apartment. But I swear, Ryan, it didn't mean anything. That phrase again, it didn't mean anything. My hands balled into fists under the table. You keep saying that, I said, my voice shaking. If it didn't mean anything, then why? Why keep doing it? Lisa broke down then, sobbing into her hands. I don't know, she cried. I was stupid, okay? I was lonely, and he made me feel wanted. But it was wrong, and I know that now. I don't know how to fix this. Her words felt like knives slicing through me. Lonely. Was that my fault? Had I been so wrapped up in work and routine that I'd let her drift away? Or was this just the excuse she was clinging to, trying to justify the unjustifiable? I stood up, unable to sit there any longer. You don't know how to fix this? Neither do I, Lisa. I don't even know if it can be fixed. As I walked toward the door, she called out after me. Wait, there's more. I need to tell you something else. I froze, dread coiling in my stomach like a snake. I turned back to face her. What now? Lisa hesitated, tears still streaming down her face. Brandon isn't the only one, she whispered. The words hit me like a freight train. What did you just say? I asked, my voice eerily calm. She broke down again, sobbing so hard she could barely get the words out. At another party, a few months ago, there was someone else. One of the clients. It was just one time and I was drunk and I held up a hand, cutting her off. Stop. Just stop. My voice was shaking now, the anger bubbling up to the surface. You expect me to believe you were just drunk? That you accidentally stumbled into bed with not one, but two different people? How many more are there, Lisa? Or are we done playing Confess Your Sins for today? She didn't answer, just sobbed into her hands again. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, slamming it behind me. My hands were shaking as I got into my car, my mind a whirlwind of rage, hurt, and disbelief. She wasn't just lying to me. She had built an entire web of lies, dragging our marriage through the dirt. And the worst part? I didn't know if I could trust a single word she said anymore. As I drove aimlessly through the city, I realized I needed to find out the truth. Not just what Lisa was willing to admit, but everything. I didn't care how messy it got or how much it hurt. I needed to know. Because one way or another, this wasn't over that I spent the rest of the day driving around, trying to make sense of everything Lisa had confessed. Or, more accurately, what little she had admitted. The pieces weren't adding up. I'd known her for over a decade. She was sneaky now, sure, but she wasn't exactly a criminal mastermind. If there were 2 affairs she had admitted to, I was willing to bet there was more she hadn't said. I decided it was time to dig deeper. Lisa's phone was the key, but she'd always been careful to delete anything incriminating. I needed to find the trail she thought she'd covered. That evening, I went home. Lisa was in the bedroom, probably crying or sulking. She didn't even try to talk to me when I walked in. Fine by me. I waited until she fell asleep, then made my move. Her phone was on the nightstand, and I carefully slid it into my pocket before heading to the guest room. I'd read about recovery apps, software that could pull up deleted texts, emails, even photos. It wasn't exactly legal, but I wasn't feeling too concerned about ethics at that moment. I downloaded one onto my laptop, connected her phone, and waited while the program churned through the data. The results? Let's just say, I wish I could unsee them. There were messages between Lisa and Brandon, of course. More than I'd imagined. Explicit ones. They weren't just meeting up at hotels or fooling around after work. They were talking about me. About how clueless I was, about how funny it was that I trusted her. One message from Brandon read, "How's Ryan? Still in the dark? LOL, poor guy." My chest tightened as I read that. The audacity of him. And her, to laugh at me while they stabbed me in the back. But it wasn't just Brandon. I found a string of messages from another number, saved as work contact. A quick scan confirmed it wasn't about work at all. The texts were even worse. "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was incredible. Winky face." That stupid winky face again. Different guy. Same sleazy emoji. This was bad enough, but the worst discovery was in her deleted photos. There were pictures. One she'd clearly meant for Brandon or this other guy. Intimate ones. And a few selfies from corporate events where she was draped over men I didn't recognize, holding drinks and flashing a smile that made my stomach turn. One photo stood out. It was from the last work party she'd gone to. A man I didn't know, older, with a suit that screamed wealth. had his arm around her waist, his hand a little too low. She wasn't pulling away. The timestamp on the photo was from a night she'd claimed to be at an all-women's networking event. My hands were trembling by the time I shut the laptop. I had everything I needed and more than I wanted. The next morning, I decided to test her again. I brought up the all-women networking event over breakfast, casually mentioning how I'd read about it online. Her response was immediate. "Oh yeah," she said, smiling nervously. It was super inspiring. Lots of powerful women sharing their stories. I nodded, biting back the urge to slam the evidence onto the table right then and there. "That's great," I said, my tone light. "What was the keynote speaker's name again? I might want to look her up." Her eyes darted to the side. I don't remember. There were a lot of speakers." The lie rolled off her tongue, so smoothly, it almost sounded rehearsed. She was still lying, even after everything that had happened. I couldn't take it anymore. "Stop," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Just stop, Lisa. I know you weren't at a women's networking event that night." Her face went pale. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice shaky. I leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "I went through your phone, Lisa. I saw the texts, the photos. All of it." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked like a deer caught in headlights, frozen in fear and guilt. "I've been sitting here, giving you the chance to come clean, but you're still lying to my face." I continued, my voice rising. "You weren't networking that night. You were with him. Or was it someone else? Because at this point, I've lost track of how many there are." Tears started streaming down her face again, but I wasn't falling for it this time. "Ryan, I didn't know how to tell you. I was scared." "Spare me," I snapped. "You weren't scared. You were reckless. And you thought I'd never find out." The room fell silent, the weight of her betrayal hanging heavy between us. For the first time, Lisa didn't try to defend herself. She just sat there, her head in her hands, sobbing quietly. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I'm done," I said, my voice cold. "I'm done playing this game with you, Lisa. You've made your choices, and now you'll deal with the consequences." As I walked out of the kitchen, she called after me, her voice breaking. "Ryan, please, don't give up on us." But I didn't stop, because the person I thought I was married to, she wasn't real, and I couldn't stay in a marriage built on lies. The days that followed were surreal. The house felt like a war zone, silent, tense, with Lisa avoiding me as much as I avoided her. I stayed in the guest room and focused on work, pretending the woman I once loved wasn't down the hall, crying and sending me text after text apologizing for everything. It wasn't enough, not even close. But while Lisa was unraveling, I was digging deeper. I needed to know exactly who I was dealing with, and that meant figuring out if there were even more layers to her deceit. My first step was to reach out to someone who could help me piece things together. My buddy Mike. He worked in IT and was the kind of guy who could crack just about anything. Mike had always been a straight shooter. When I explained the situation, he didn't sugarcoat his reaction. "Man, that's rough," he said. "But if you think she's still hiding stuff, I'll help you find it." I handed him a copy of everything I'd pulled from Lisa's phone. Texts, photos, emails, it was all there. Mike promised to look into it and get back to me in a couple of days. In the meantime, I decided to keep my distance from Lisa. Every time I saw her, I felt the anger bubbling up again, and I didn't trust myself to keep calm. 2 days later, Mike called. His voice was serious, no trace of the easygoing tone he usually had. "Ryan, you're not going to believe this," he said. My stomach tightened. "What did you find?" "There's more," he said. "A lot more. Lisa wasn't just fooling around with Brandon or some random client. She's been, let's just say, expanding her network." "What does that mean?" I asked, dread creeping into my voice. "It means there are at least 3 more guys I could trace, probably more. And get this. One of them works at the same hotel where you caught her with Brandon. She's been using his employee discount to book rooms." The air felt like it had been sucked out of the room. 3 more? I whispered. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," Mike said. I cross-referenced text timestamps with her location data. It's all there. And Ryan, it gets worse. One of these guys isn't just some random fling. He's married. His wife might not know what's going on. I sat down, my legs suddenly feeling like jelly. Lisa wasn't just cheating. She was reckless, dragging other people into her mess without a second thought. "Send me everything," I told Mike, my voice barely steady. "I need to see it for myself." When the files hit my inbox that night, I forced myself to go through them, even though every message, every photo felt like a fresh wound. There was no denying it now. Lisa had turned our marriage into a circus act, and I was the fool who didn't see the strings being pulled. But the final blow came when I saw the name of the married man she'd been involved with: Mark Wheeler. I froze. Mark Wheeler wasn't just anyone. He was my boss, Mark Wheeler. My boss. The name flashed on the screen like a bad punchline to the worst joke imaginable. I stared at the evidence Mike had sent me. Text threads between Lisa and Mark, photos of them together at a conference I didn't even know she'd attended. My stomach churned as I pieced it all together. Lisa hadn't just betrayed me as a husband. She'd tangled my work life into this mess. Mark was the guy who shook my hand every Monday morning, the one who signed my paychecks. And now, I couldn't even think of his name without feeling my blood boil. I slammed my laptop shut and paced the room, my fists clenched. This wasn't just a personal betrayal anymore. This was nuclear. If I went after Lisa, I'd be taking down Mark too. But if I didn't do something, I'd be stuck working under the man who thought it was fine to sleep with my wife. The next morning, I went to work, every nerve on edge. Mark's office was just down the hall from mine, and it took everything in me not to march in there and knock the smug grin off his face. But I had to be smart. If I blew up at him now, I'd lose my leverage. I bided my time, keeping my head down and avoiding Mark as much as possible. That afternoon, Mike called again. "I've got something else," he said, his tone heavy. "What now?" I asked, bracing myself. Mark isn't just having an affair with Lisa. He's using company funds to cover it up. Hotel charges, dinners, gifts, it's all coming out of the company account. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Mark wasn't just a cheater. He was a crook. My anger bubbled over into something darker, an opportunity. "Mike," I said, my voice cold, "how solid is this evidence?" "Rock solid," he replied. "You could walk into HR right now and have him fired. Or worse." I thanked him and hung up, my mind racing. I had the ammunition to destroy Mark's career and, by extension, expose Lisa's lies to everyone who mattered. But the question was, how far was I willing to go? That evening, I went home to find Lisa sitting on the couch, her phone in her lap. She looked up at me with puffy eyes, her face pale. "Ryan, can we talk?" "Talk," I said, laughing bitterly. "Sure. Let's talk about Mark Wheeler." Her face drained of color. "W, what are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb, Lisa," I snapped, stepping closer. "I know everything. I know about Mark. I know about the hotels, the gifts, the fact that you were helping him funnel company money into your little escapades." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. For the first time in weeks, she looked genuinely terrified. "How could you do this?" I demanded. "You didn't just betray me. You jeopardized my job, my reputation. Do you even understand what you've done?" "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Mark, he pressured me. He said no one would find out. I didn't know how to stop it." "Oh, so now it's his fault?" I said, my voice rising. "Don't act like a victim, Lisa. You made your choices." She broke down, sobbing into her hands, but I didn't feel the slightest bit of sympathy. "You don't understand," she said through her tears. "If this gets out, it'll ruin everything, for both of us." "For you," I corrected, my voice icy. "It'll ruin everything for you. And frankly, I don't care anymore." I left her there, crying on the couch, and locked myself in the guest room. I needed time to think, to decide my next move. Should I expose Mark to HR and risk the fallout at work? Should I confront him directly and let him squirm? Or should I sit back, gather more evidence, and make sure when I took him and Lisa down, there was no way for them to recover? One thing was clear: I wasn't going to let them win. The next morning, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. Mark Wheeler needed to know the game was over, and I wasn't going to let him slink away unscathed. I headed into work early, my stomach churning with a mix of nerves and rage. Mark's office door was open when I arrived. He sat behind his massive desk, scrolling through his phone, oblivious to the storm about to hit. I stepped inside, shutting the door behind me. The click made him glance up, his usual cocky grin plastered across his face. "Ryan, early start today," he said, leaning back in his chair. I didn't sit down. Instead, I dropped a folder onto his desk, the papers inside spilling out slightly. His grin faltered as he picked it up. "What's this?" he asked, his tone more cautious now. "Your undoing," I said flatly. Mark's face paled as he flipped through the pages. Printouts of emails, expense reports, hotel bookings, and even a few text exchanges between him and Lisa. By the time he reached the bottom, his hands were shaking. "Ryan," he began, his voice unsteady. I can explain." I cut him off, leaning over the desk. "Don't. You think I'm here for excuses? You slept with my wife, Mark. And as if that wasn't bad enough, you dragged my career into your mess." He stammered, his confident persona crumbling. "It wasn't like that. I mean, it wasn't personal. Lisa and I, It wasn't personal?" I snapped, my voice rising. "You used company funds to cover your tracks. You put my job at risk, all while laughing behind my back. So don't tell me it wasn't personal." Mark's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. For a man who always had something to say, he was suddenly speechless. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, straightening up. "You're going to resign. Quietly. If you don't, I'll take this to HR, the board, and every news outlet in the city. You'll lose your career, your reputation, everything." Mark's eyes darted around the room like he was searching for an escape route. "Ryan, please," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We can work this out. There's no need to blow this up." I leaned in again, my voice cold. "Oh, it's already blown up, Mark. I'm just giving you a chance to salvage what little dignity you have left." The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. Finally, Mark nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "Fine," he muttered. "I'll resign. But this stays between us, okay? No HR, no public drama. I'll decide what happens next," I said, grabbing the folder and heading for the door. "You've got until the end of the day to submit your resignation. If you don't, I'm taking this public." As I left his office, I felt a rush of satisfaction. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had some control over the situation. But the battle wasn't over. Not by a long shot. That night, I confronted Lisa again. "Mark's resigning," I told her as soon as I walked through the door. She looked up from the couch, her face etched with worry. "What? How do you know that?" "Because I made him," I said, my voice cold. "I gave him a choice, resign or be exposed. And now, Lisa, I'm giving you the same choice. You tell me everything, or I'll make sure your little web of lies collapses." She paled, her eyes wide with fear. "Ryan, please, I'm begging you. Don't do this." "Then start talking," I demanded, "because I'm done playing games." The truth that followed was more than I ever expected. Lisa sat frozen on the couch, her face as pale as the walls around us. Her hands twisted the fabric of her sweatshirt, and for a moment, I thought she might pass out. But I wasn't letting her off the hook. "Start talking, Lisa," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I want everything. No more lies, no more half-truths. If you hold back even one detail, I swear, I'm done." She took a shaky breath, tears brimming in her eyes. "It started with Brandon," she began, her voice barely audible. "That much is true. He flirted with me at work, and I was stupid enough to let it happen. It wasn't serious at first, just fun, but then it escalated." "Escalated how?" I asked, my arms crossed. She hesitated, then whispered, "We slept together. A few times. It was never supposed to be more than that." "Right?" I said bitterly. "Because nothing says harmless fun like sneaking into hotel rooms." She winced but pressed on. "After Brandon, there was someone else. One of our clients. It was a mistake." "You've used that word a lot, Lisa," I said. "But you didn't just trip into bed with these guys. Keep going." Her face crumpled, and she buried her face in her hands. And then there was Mark. I clenched my jaw, my anger flaring again. "Mark Wheeler. My boss. You've been lying to me for months, Lisa. Why? What the hell were you thinking?" She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know," she cried. Mark, he made me feel important. He said all the right things, and Stop, I interrupted. Don't blame this on him. You made the choice to go along with it. Her shoulders sagged, and she nodded weakly. You're right, I did. But it got out of control, Ryan. Mark started asking for more meetings, favors. He said he could help me get ahead at work, but only if I kept him happy. I didn't know how to stop. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. So you're telling me he blackmailed you? Is that what you're going with? She shook her head. No, it wasn't like that. Not exactly. I didn't want to lose my job. And I didn't want to lose you either. Her words felt like a slap. You didn't want to lose me? Lisa, you lost me the second you started lying. You lost me when you decided our marriage wasn't enough. She broke down again, her sobs echoing through the room. For a brief moment, I felt the tiniest flicker of pity for her, but it was quickly drowned out by the sheer weight of her betrayal. What about the money? I asked. The company funds Mark used to cover for you too. Did you know about that? Her head snapped up, her eyes wide. What? No, I didn't know about the money. I swear. I studied her, searching for any hint of deception. For once, she seemed genuinely clueless. But at this point, I didn't trust her any more than I trusted Mark. Whether you knew or not doesn't change the fact that you've destroyed everything, I said, my voice cold. Our marriage, my job, my trust in you. It's all gone, Lisa. So tell me, what do you expect me to do now? Just forgive you and pretend none of this happened? She sobbed harder, shaking her head. I don't know. I don't want to lose you, Ryan. I'll do anything, therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. Just don't leave me. Her desperation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I didn't know if I could forgive her. I didn't know if I even wanted to try. I need time, I said finally, my voice flat. And I need space. Don't expect me to make any decisions right now. You've already made enough for the both of us. I walked out of the room, her sobs following me like a haunting echo. In the guest room, I collapsed onto the bed, staring at the ceiling as the weight of everything came crashing down. She had confessed, finally, but the truth only made things worse. Now, I had to figure out where to go from here, and I still wasn't sure I could forgive her. The following week was hell. Lisa tiptoed around the house like a ghost, avoiding me unless it was absolutely necessary. When she did speak, it was always some variation of, I'm sorry, or can we talk? I wasn't ready for either. I buried myself in work, or what was left of it, now that Mark's resignation had stirred up a whirlwind of gossip at the office. People whispered about why he left so suddenly, and a few colleagues even approached me with curious looks, fishing for details. I kept my responses vague, but the tension was suffocating. Every time I heard his name, I wanted to scream. On Friday, Lisa texted me at work. Lisa, can we have dinner tonight? Just us. I think we need to talk. I stare at the screen, torn. Part of me wanted to ignore her, to keep punishing her with silence. But another part, the part that still clung to the 8 years we'd spent together, felt like I owed her at least one final conversation. Me? Fine. 7 p.m. When I got home, the house was unusually quiet. The smell of something cooking wafted from the kitchen. Her attempt at olive branches, no doubt. She had set the dining table with candles and my favorite meal, a sight that might have softened me months ago. Now it felt hollow. Lisa appeared from the kitchen, her face lined with exhaustion. Thanks for agreeing to this, she said softly. I sat down, not bothering to respond. She poured me a glass of wine and sat across from me, her hands folded nervously in her lap. I know I've said this 100 times, but I'm sorry, she began. For everything. I know I've broken your trust, and I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. But I love you, Ryan. I still do. And I want to fix this. I took a sip of wine, keeping my expression neutral. Fix this? I echoed. Lisa, you didn't just cheat. You didn't just lie. You turned our entire marriage into a joke. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I pressed on. Do you even understand what you've done? I can't go back to work without hearing whispers about Mark. Our friends, our family will never look at us the same if they find out. And worst of all, I can't look at you without wondering who you really are. Her tears spilled over, and she reached across the table for my hand. "Please, Ryan," she pleaded. "I know I messed up, but I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. Counseling, therapy, anything. Just don't give up on us." I stared at her hand on mine, my chest a storm of conflicting emotions. Anger, sadness, betrayal, and somewhere, buried deep beneath it all, a flicker of love. But love wasn't enough anymore. I pulled my hand away. "It's not that simple, Lisa," I said, my voice heavy. "You can't just snap your fingers and fix this. You've destroyed everything we built together." She broke down completely, her sobs shaking her body. "Don't leave me," she choked out. "Please, Ryan, I'll do anything." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think that maybe, somehow, we could rebuild. But then my phone buzzed on the table, and everything changed. The message was from Mike. "Mike, I got something you need to see. Call me ASAP." I excused myself, leaving Lisa crying at the table. In the guest room, I called Mike, my heart pounding. "What is it?" I asked as soon as he answered. Mike sighed. "You're not going to like this, but I found more. A lot more." "What do you mean?" "I kept digging through the recovery files on Lisa's phone," he said. "There are messages she sent to one of the guys, Brandon, I think, where she's talking about you. About your finances." "What about my finances?" I demanded, dread creeping into my voice. "She was feeding him information," Mike said grimly. "Passwords, account details. It looks like Brandon was trying to convince her to move money out of your accounts into hers, or into something they shared." The room spun around me as his words sank in. This wasn't just cheating. This wasn't just lies. Lisa had been planning to drain me dry. "Send me everything," I said through gritted teeth. "Already did," Mike replied. "Check your email." I hung up, opened my laptop, and clicked on the file Mike had sent. The messages were all there, clear as day. Lisa talking about restructuring our finances, Brandon assuring her that he'd handle everything once the funds were moved. My hands shook as I slammed the laptop shut. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was outright theft. I stormed back into the dining room, where Lisa was still sitting, her tear-streaked face lighting up with a flicker of hope when she saw me. "Ryan, save it," I snapped, slamming the folder of messages onto the table. "What's this about you and Brandon stealing my money?" Her face turned ghostly white. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered. "Don't lie to me again, Lisa," I roared. "I have everything. The texts, the plans, all of it. Were you really going to leave me with nothing?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. The truth was written all over her face. Lisa sat frozen, her face drained of color. The guilt in her wide eyes was confirmation enough, but I wasn't letting her off the hook that easily. "Answer me," I demanded, my voice cutting through the silence. "Were you planning to take my money?" Her lips trembled as she stammered. I wasn't. It wasn't like that." "Don't lie to me," I shouted, slamming my hand on the table. "I have the messages, Lisa. You and Brandon were discussing moving money out of our accounts. What was the plan? To leave me with nothing and ride off into the sunset." She shook her head violently, tears streaming down her face. "No, it wasn't like that, Ryan. I swear. He pressured me. He said we'd only take a little, just to..." "To what?" I snapped, leaning closer. "To test how gullible I am? To see how far you could push this? What exactly was your endgame, Lisa?" Her sobs intensified, and she buried her face in her hands. "I didn't want to do it. I didn't, Ryan. But he kept pushing me. He said if I didn't, he'd tell you about us." The disgust inside me threatened to boil over. "So, your solution was to go along with it? To steal from me instead of just coming clean? You really thought that was the best move?" Lisa broke down completely, her voice cracking as she cried. "I wasn't thinking, Ryan. I was scared and desperate. I didn't know what else to do." I laughed bitterly, the sound cold and sharp. "No, Lisa, you knew exactly what you were doing. You just didn't think you'd get caught. And now that you have, you're scrambling for excuses." Her hands dropped to her sides, and she looked at me with wide, pleading eyes. "I'll fix it," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I'll move the money back. I'll cut Brandon off. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." I stared at her, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like a boulder. You still don't get it, do you? I said, my voice cold. This isn't just about the money. This is about you destroying everything we had. Everything I believed in. She reached out to grab my hand, but I pulled away, taking a step back. Ryan, please, she sobbed. Don't give up on me. I can fix this. I can fix us. I shook my head slowly, my heart pounding. I don't think you can, I said, my voice low but steady. Because the person I thought I married doesn't exist. I grabbed the folder of evidence and turned toward the door. Lisa's sobs followed me, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. Not this time. Where are you going? She cried, running after me. To figure out how to clean up the mess you made, I said without turning around. And don't bother trying to stop me. I drove straight to Mike's house. He opened the door, his face lined with concern. You okay? He asked. No, I replied bluntly, stepping inside. But I'm done playing games. We're going to the cops. Mike nodded without hesitation. You've got more than enough to nail her and Brandon. Let's make sure they pay. For the next few hours, we organized everything, texts, bank records, photos. By the time we were done, the case was airtight. Lisa and Brandon wouldn't just lose everything. They'd be facing legal consequences too. When I left Mike's house, I felt a grim sense of resolve. The next morning, I'd filed a report and put the wheels in motion. There was no coming back from this. Not for Lisa and not for us. When I got home, Lisa was waiting for me in the living room, her eyes red and swollen. She stood as soon as I walked in, clutching a tissue in her trembling hands. Ryan, she began, her voice breaking. Please, I can't lose you. I stared at her, my expression blank. You already have. Lisa crumpled onto the couch as my words hung in the air. Her sobs echoed through the room, but I felt nothing. No pity, no anger, not even sadness. Just emptiness. I stood there, watching her fall apart, knowing there was no coming back from this. You don't understand, she choked out between sobs. I didn't mean for it to go this far, Ryan. I didn't mean to hurt you. Didn't mean to? I repeated, my voice cold. Lisa, you didn't just hurt me. You betrayed me over and over again. And you didn't stop until you got caught. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. I'll do anything to fix this, she pleaded. I'll go to counseling. I'll quit my job. Just tell me what to do. I shook my head, my hands clenching into fists. You don't get it, do you? This isn't something you can fix with therapy or a resignation letter. You didn't just break my trust. You shattered it. Her face crumpled again, and she buried her head in her hands. Please, she whispered. Don't leave me. I'm not leaving you, Lisa, I said, my voice firm. You left me the moment you started lying. The moment you decided I wasn't enough for you. She opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't give her the chance. I turned and walked out of the room, heading straight for the guest bedroom. I didn't slam the door. I didn't have the energy. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. The next morning, I was at the police station by 9 a.m., the folder of evidence clutched tightly in my hands. Filing a report felt surreal, like I was crossing a line I couldn't uncross. But as I handed over the documents and explained the situation, I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. Lisa and Brandon weren't just going to get away with this. The officer who took my statement assured me they'd investigate the matter thoroughly. This is serious, she said, flipping through the papers. If everything checks out, they could be looking at criminal charges for attempted theft and fraud. Good, I replied, my voice steely. I want them held accountable. When I got home, Lisa was waiting for me in the kitchen. She looked like she hadn't slept, her hair a mess and her eyes swollen. Where were you? She asked, her voice shaky. I dropped my keys on the counter and met her gaze. At the police station, I said bluntly. Her face went pale. What? Why? To file a report, I said. Brandon's going to pay for what he did. And if you're involved, and let's be honest, Lisa, you'll face the consequences too. She gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Ryan, no. You can't do that. Why not? I snapped. You didn't think twice about destroying my life. Why should I spare yours? Tears streamed down her face, but they didn't move me. Ryan, please. I'll lose everything. My job, my reputation, everything. You should have thought about that before you started playing games with my life, I said coldly. This is on you, Lisa. You made your choices. She crumpled to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. I left her there and went upstairs to pack a bag. I couldn't stay in that house any longer. Not with her. Not with the memories of what we'd once had. As I threw clothes into a duffel bag, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Mike. Mike, just heard from my buddy in HR. Brandon's wife found out. She's filing for divorce. I stared at the screen, a bitter smile tugging at my lips. At least someone else was taking control of the situation. I grabbed my bag, walked downstairs, and headed for the door. Lisa scrambled to her feet, panic etched on her face. Where are you going? She cried. Away, I said simply. I can't do this anymore, Lisa. You made sure of that. She reached for my arm, but I stepped back, my voice firm. Don't try to stop me. You made your bed, and now you'll lie in it. Alone. With that, I walked out the door, the weight of her betrayal finally lifting as I left her behind, that I spent the first night away at a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where no one asks questions and no one cares why you're there. The walls were thin, the bed creaked, and the room smelled faintly of mildew. But it was bliss compared to the suffocating tension of being under the same roof as Lisa. The next morning, my phone was flooded with messages. Lisa, please, Ryan. We can talk this out. Come home. Lisa, I'll fix everything. I swear. Lisa, don't ruin my life over one mistake. Mistake. That word burned every time I read it. One mistake? She had made dozens, each worse than the last. I didn't respond. I didn't even read the rest of the texts. Instead, I called Mike. How's everything on your end? I asked, keeping my voice low. Mike sighed. It's blowing up. HR is in chaos because Brandon's wife didn't just file for divorce. She's also threatening to sue the company. Claims they enabled his behavior. It's a mess. Good, I said. Maybe they'll think twice before letting someone like him run wild again. What about you? Mike asked. What's your next move? I didn't have a good answer. One step at a time, I said. Right now, I just need space. Fair enough, Mike replied. But if you need backup, you know where to find me. Later that afternoon, I got a call from the police station. The officer handling my case wanted to update me on the investigation. Mr. Davis, she began, her tone professional but laced with urgency. We've reviewed the evidence you submitted. It's clear there was intent to commit fraud, and we're moving forward with charges against Brandon. However, your wife's involvement is complicated. Complicated how? I asked, gripping the phone tightly. She was complicit in providing financial information, which could make her an accessory, the officer explained. But there's also evidence suggesting she was pressured into it. If that's the case, the DA might pursue a plea deal. I clenched my jaw. So, what does that mean for me? It means you'll need to decide whether you want to push for her to face charges or cooperate with her if she's willing to testify against Brandon. Testify against Brandon? The idea twisted something in my gut. Did I want to see Lisa punished? Yes, but dragging her through the legal system felt messy. And for all her lies, Brandon was the one who masterminded the financial scheme. I'll think about it, I said finally. That night, I sat in the motel room, staring at the ceiling. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and decisions I never thought I'd have to make. Lisa's texts kept buzzing on my phone, but I ignored them. Around 10 p.m., my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Lisa. It was Brandon. Brandon, we need to talk. Man to man. I stared at the screen, my blood boiling. The audacity of this guy to reach out to me after everything. Part of me wanted to block him, but another part, the part that craved closure, wanted to hear what he had to say. I replied with 2 words. Name the place. The next morning, I met Brandon at a dingy diner on the edge of town. He was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a coffee in front of him. His usual smug expression was gone, replaced by something that looked suspiciously like fear. Ryan, he began, standing awkwardly as I approached. Thanks for meeting me. I didn't shake his hand. I didn't even acknowledge the gesture. I slid into the booth across from him, folding my arms. Talk. He sat back down, running a hand through his hair. Look, I know I screwed up, he said. I messed with your wife. I messed with your life, and now it's all falling apart. Good, I said bluntly. His jaw tightened, but he nodded. Fair. I deserve that. But I need you to hear me out. Why? I asked, my voice cold. What could you possibly say that would make any of this better? I want to fix this, he said, leaning forward. I'll cooperate with the investigation. I'll admit to everything. Just don't drag Lisa into this. She doesn't deserve it. I laughed bitterly. Now you're defending her? After you dragged her into this mess in the first place? Brandon flinched but didn't back down. She made mistakes, sure. But this was on me. I took advantage of her, and I pushed her to do things she didn't want to do. If someone's going down for this, it should be me. His words didn't soften me. If anything, they only made me angrier. You think you're the hero now? I snapped. You think taking the blame makes you noble? You're just covering your own tail. Ryan, please, he said, his voice cracking. I'm trying to make this right. Just think about it. I sat in the motel room, staring at the walls as Brandon's words echoed in my mind. If someone's going down for this, it should be me. His attempt at redemption felt hollow, but it planted a seed of doubt. Was Lisa as much of a victim as he claimed? Had she truly been manipulated, or was this just another way for Brandon to control the narrative? The knock on my door snapped me out of my thoughts. I opened it cautiously, half expecting Lisa. Instead, it was Mike. You look like you've been hit by a truck, he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. He tossed a bag of takeout onto the table and sat down. You've eaten, right? Not hungry, I muttered, collapsing onto the chair opposite him. Mike unwrapped a burger, taking a bite before speaking. I heard about your little meeting with Brandon. You planning to take him up on his deal? I don't know, I admitted. He's offering to take the blame, but I can't trust a word he says. And Lisa, I don't even know who she is anymore. Mike nodded, wiping his hands on a napkin. Look, man, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but you've got options. You can push for charges against both of them, or let Lisa testify against Brandon and cut her some slack. I rubbed my temples, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. If I let her off, she'll think I'm forgiving her. Not necessarily, Mike said. You're not forgiving her. You're just prioritizing who deserves to go down more. And let's be real, Brandon's the ringleader here. I leaned back, exhaling heavily. Mike was right, but the thought of Lisa getting any sort of pass made my stomach churn. The next morning, I went to the police station for a follow-up meeting with the investigator handling the case. She greeted me with a clipboard and a no-nonsense expression. Mr. Davis, I need to know how you'd like to proceed, she said, sitting across from me. Do you want us to pursue charges against your wife? Or would you prefer to focus solely on Brandon? I hesitated, my mind racing. Pursuing charges against Lisa felt like justice, but it also meant dragging the situation out even further, making everything uglier than it already was. On the other hand, cutting her a deal would mean letting her avoid the full consequences of her actions. What happens if Lisa testifies against Brandon? I asked finally. She'd likely face a reduced penalty, the officer explained. Maybe probation, maybe nothing at all. It depends on how cooperative she is. And if I push for charges against both of them? It's your right, she said. But it could complicate the case, especially if her cooperation is key to convicting Brandon. I leaned forward, clasping my hands together. And if I walk away from all of it? The officer frowned. Then the case could fall apart. Without your cooperation, we might not have enough to go after either of them. I sat back, my heart pounding. Whatever decision I made, there was no going back. That evening, I went back to the house for the first time since I'd left. Lisa was sitting on the couch, staring at her phone. She jumped when she saw me. Ryan, she said, her voice trembling. You're here. Don't get excited, I said coldly, shutting the door behind me. I'm here to talk. That's it. She nodded quickly, wiping her eyes. I'll do whatever you want, she said. Just tell me what to do. I sat down across from her, meeting her gaze with a steeliness I barely felt. The cops want to know if you're willing to testify against Brandon. Her face fell, and she swallowed hard. Testify? You heard me, I said. They have enough to charge both of you, but they're giving you a way out. If you cooperate, you might avoid charges. She wrung her hands, her eyes darting around the room. What happens if I don't? Then you go down with him, I said bluntly. And don't think for a second I'll stop it. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I'll do it. I'll testify. I'll tell them everything. I studied her carefully. For once, her desperation didn't feel performative. It felt real. But I wasn't ready to let her off the hook just yet. This doesn't mean we're okay, I said. You've destroyed any chance of that. But if taking Brandon down means cutting you a deal, I'll consider it. She sobbed, her shoulders shaking, but I didn't comfort her. I couldn't. I'll let the cops know, I said, standing up. And after that, we're done. Lisa looked up at me, her face crumpling. Done, she whispered. I nodded. This marriage was over the moment you betrayed me, Lisa. You don't come back from something like this. She collapsed into tears as I walked out the door, closing it behind me without a second glance. The next day, I called the investigator and told her Lisa would testify. The case against Brandon moved forward, and I felt a grim sense of satisfaction knowing he wouldn't walk away unscathed. As for Lisa, she got her deal, but as far as I was concerned, she was just another chapter in a story I'd never read again. I didn't respond. I stood up, threw some cash on the table for my coffee, and walked out without looking back. Back in the motel room, I replayed Brandon's words over and over in my head. Was he really trying to make things right? Or was this just another lie? And what about Lisa? Could I let her off the hook? Knowing how deep she'd been in all of this, I didn't have the answers yet. But one thing was clear, this wasn't over.